There is a plant that in ancient times was valued not for its taste and not for its beauty. It was respected for survival. In sources about ancient Rome, it appears without pathos, almost between the lines, as something taken for granted. It was not served at feasts. It did not decorate the tables of patricians. But it was considered reliable enough to be taken along to places where there was no margin for error. When the Romans spoke of strength, they rarely meant ostentatious luxury. They were interested in something else, what works over the long term, what does not fail in the heat, what can be carried for days, what does not become a problem when there is nothing around but dust, wind, and fatigue. And that is precisely why, in their everyday reality, an important role was played by plants that required little attention but delivered results. Many historians have noted that the Roman army was strong, not only because of discipline, but also because of rationality. A soldier had to cover vast distances while carrying everything he needed. Food had to be light, dense, and stable. Meat fit these requirements poorly. It spoiled, required a constant supply and logistics. Plants, on the contrary, provided what today would be called stability. Ancient texts mention crops that were not grown for wealth, but were ideally suited for survival. They were valued not for taste, but for effect. They gave a lasting feeling of fullness. They did not require constant care, and most importantly, they could grow where other plants gave up. The Romans, like many agricultural civilizations, closely observed the soil. Even then, it was noticed that some plants did not exhaust the land, but seemed to return strength to it. After them, the fields looked different. Harvests in subsequent years were more stable. This was not called science, but it was known in practice. It is here that a plant appears that today is almost never spoken about. It is not bright. It does not try to please. It does not promise an easy path, but it is remarkably honest. It does not grow for humans, but it is willing to cooperate. It does not pamper, but it rewards patience. It was written about as a stubborn and self-sufficient crop. It did not require fertile land. It could be found where the soil was considered poor and unpromising, and yet it was precisely there that it showed itself best. Over time, attitudes toward food began to change. As societies grew wealthier, food ceased to be a tool of survival and became a symbol. Simple, reliable products began to be associated with poverty. They were not openly rejected. They were simply no longer valued. We began to choose not what endures hard times, but what looks good in abundance. Thus, it was not weak plants that disappeared from the everyday diet, but modest ones, those that did not need advertising, those that did not promise instant pleasure. They continued to grow, but outside the spotlight. One such plant today is known by the name lupine. In particular, its traditional bitter varieties, which were used long before the emergence of the modern agricultural system. In ancient sources, it does not occupy a central place, but appears again and again, as a reliable background, as a quiet participant in great histories. Lupine was never the food of kings, but it was noticed by those who thought one step ahead. Farmers valued it for its unusual ability to influence the soil, travelers for its resilience, and ordinary people for the fact that it did not let them down. Over time, the world became impatient. We built systems that do not tolerate waiting, and plants that require time and understanding turned out to be inconvenient. Not bad, just inconvenient. But history knows how to bring forgotten names back, especially when familiar solutions begin to fail. And today, more and more people are once again looking at this plant differently, not as a relic of the past, but as a possible answer for the future. When people speak of the strength of plants, they most often mean the harvest. How much can be gathered? How much can be sold? How much profit can be made? But nature has always had different criteria. It values not showiness, but resilience. Not speed, but the ability to hold on when conditions become harsh. And by these criteria, lupine has always seemed strange, almost as if it plays by its own rules. Farmers who worked with this crop in different eras often noticed one detail: lupine rarely behaved like an ordinary plant. Where other crops demanded constant intervention, fertilizers, and monitoring, it seemed to act independently. Its roots went deeper than expected. Its growth did not depend on ideal conditions. And the most curious thing, after it, the soil looked different. There are accounts in which farmers noted that the soil after lupine became more alive. They could not always explain it, but they remembered the effect. Today, scientists talk about legumes' ability to interact with soil microorganisms, fix nitrogen, and influence nutrient availability. Back then, it was put more simply, a good plant for the soil. But the soil is only part of the story. Far more interesting is how lupine behaves as a source of food. It was rarely described as tasty, but almost always as filling. People spoke of it as food after which one could work or travel for a long time without being distracted by hunger. In a world where calories were not numbers but sensations, this mattered greatly. Some modern researchers note the unusually high nutrient density of lupine seeds. In dried form, it is often mentioned among plants with high levels of plant protein. It is emphasized that this is not about trendy substitutes, but about a crop known to humanity for thousands of years. This is not a discovery, it is a reminder. Special attention deserves its amino acid profile. Scientific publications cautiously note that lupine contains a wide spectrum of amino acids, including those often called essential. Not perfect, not magical, but remarkably balanced for a plant that was never bred for the sports nutrition industry. Equally interesting is what it almost lacks. Lupine is rarely associated with saturated fats or cholesterol, the very elements that today are spoken of with caution. Perhaps this is why, in recent years, it has regained attention from people seeking simpler and more understandable food sources. But if lupine is so useful, a logical question arises. Why hasn't it become a cornerstone of modern agriculture? The answer, as often happens, lies not in biology, but in convenience. The modern food system values predictability, speed, and ease of processing. Lupine does not hurry. It does not grow to fit a schedule. Its seeds require understanding. Its taste does not seek immediate approval. It is not ready to be a fast product. And this is precisely what makes it inconvenient for industry, but valuable for a person who thinks beyond the next meal. Comparing lupine to animal sources of protein, some analysts emphasize the difference in resources. Animal husbandry requires land, water, feed, and constant supervision. Plants work differently, especially those that do not deplete the soil but interact with it. In this sense, lupine is often called a dual-purpose crop. It provides nutrition while influencing the ecosystem. There are observations that lupine can grow where other crops are considered unprofitable. Sandy soils, poor lands, harsh climatic conditions, these are exactly where it is often found. For farmers of the past, this meant opportunity. For the modern world, an alternative. Interestingly, in traditional agricultural systems, lupine was rarely grown alone. It was considered part of a system. It prepared the soil, created conditions, and then gave way to other plants. It was not the main hero, but a reliable partner. And perhaps this is why it never became a symbol of an era of abundance. Today, as discussions of soil restoration, sustainable agriculture, and reducing ecosystem stress become more common, lupine reappears in conversation. Not as a sensation, but as an example that many solutions were found long before us. We simply stopped noticing them. Yet there is a reason why lupine still remains on the periphery. Its seeds are protected. Nature seems to have decided in advance, that this plant should not be eaten without effort. Its taste contains something that deters the impatient, something that forces one to stop, figure things out, wait. And this is where the story of lupine takes a sharp turn, because its main feature is not its nutritional value or its benefit to the soil. It is that it demands from humans a quality that the modern world has lost faster than anything else. And so we stand on the edge of understanding why lupine has always been a mystery. While we have spoken of its strength and usefulness, something invisible but important remained: the quality that made it difficult, almost forbidden for the casual consumer. Bitterness, complex, persistent, almost repelling. The seeds seem to whisper, if you are looking for an easy path, go away. And this is not a metaphor. Sources mention that ancient people knew how to recognize plants that demanded patience. They believed that only by understanding the processes of nature could one extract true wealth from its generosity. This bitterness, as it turns out, was a natural shield. It protected the seeds from insects, from animals, and from those who were too impatient. Scientists studying legumes note that plants with such chemical defenses create a safe space for themselves. In this sense, lupine was almost a biological architect of its own survival. It is no coincidence that farmers of the past said, "Not every seed is ready to be eaten immediately." It was a kind of dialogue. Humans learned to understand the plant, and the plant learned to trust humans. And it is precisely this dialogue that makes lupine special. Unlike modern crops grown for speed and profit, lupine required time, attention, and understanding. It taught patience, discipline, and respect for the process. There are mentions that Mediterranean peoples called the process of preparing the seeds baptism, not as a religious ritual, but as a way to wash away the bitterness, prepare the seed for consumption, and simultaneously understand its rhythm. Every step mattered: soaking, boiling, soaking for several days, changing the water again and again. This was not just food processing, it was a practice that demanded observation, consistency, and caution. For a modern person, such an approach seems slow, almost impractical. But this is where the philosophy of the plant is revealed. It not only nourished the body, but also cultivated the skill of waiting, taught respect for what cannot be manipulated instantly. Perhaps this is why lupine remained on the periphery of civilization. A fast-paced, comfortable, impatient world did not want to learn from a plant that obeyed only those willing to spend time understanding its essence. The bitterness that we so often strive to remove was simultaneously a protection and a shield of purity. Modern sources cautiously note that the chemical compounds giving the seeds their bitter taste acted as natural pesticides. Insects avoided them, animals did not touch the leaves or stems, and only a careful human could prepare the seed for consumption while preserving all its beneficial properties. One could say that lupine was one of the first crops where safety and nutrition went hand in hand, without chemicals, without human interference, without growth accelerators. Nature itself created conditions for the plant to remain pure and nutrient-rich. And if we look at this more broadly, it becomes clear why lupine was often called food for the long journey. In ancient times, it was taken on campaigns, expeditions, and trade routes. The seeds did not spoil, required no refrigeration, were nutritious, and provided long-lasting energy. Sources mention that soldiers and travelers kept them in bags along with other grains, not for taste, but for survival. They knew if you prepared the seed correctly, you would get protein, energy, and protection. If not, the bitterness would remind you of your haste and carelessness. Modern comparisons with meat or other protein sources offer an interesting perspective. At a time when raising a cow or even storing meat was a challenge, lupine provided hope. It required no vast pastures, no complicated feeding, no special conditions. Even on poor soils, where other plants died, lupine grew. Some researchers note that its deep roots and ability to fix nitrogen made the soil more fertile. In other words, the seeds provided food, while the plant simultaneously improved the soil, almost like a natural farm in one. But the most remarkable thing is not that. The most remarkable thing is that people for centuries knew how to bypass its defenses without destroying them. They understood that the seed had to be soaked, had to undergo a test of time, had to open in the hands of someone willing to wait. And after all these steps came the reward: dense texture, nutty flavor, nutritional value, an almost complete amino acid profile. Sources emphasize this was not just nourishment, it was a lesson the plant gave to humans ready to listen. It is precisely this balance between a complex natural defense and outstanding usefulness that makes lupine so unique. It does not merely survive, it tests humans. It forces reflection. Can you slow down, understand the power of patience, appreciate what is not obtained instantly? In this sense, bitterness becomes a teacher, and the seed, a small temple of knowledge, holding wisdom for thousands of years. Today, many researchers and farmers note that returning to such crops is not only a way to ensure protein, but also an opportunity to reconnect with nature, to learn its rhythms and laws. Lupine does not try to be convenient. It does not seek mass consumption. It is like an old friend who greets you with a challenge. Understand me, and you will gain more than just food. Fail, and you will lose time, energy, and the chance to appreciate what has been valued for centuries. And here we return to the ancient Romans. Sources mention that their armies took lupine seeds on campaigns, not because they were tasty, but because they were reliable. Their soldiers learned patience alongside the plant. It gave strength that could not be measured by numbers or seen at first glance. In today's world, where we seek quick solutions, it is easy to forget such allies. Lupine remains a reminder. Value does not always shout, it tests. Thus, the seed becomes a symbol of patience, connection with nature, and respect for what truly works in the long term. Bitterness is no longer an enemy. It is part of the lesson, and those willing to undergo it receive not just protein, but an understanding of how to interact with a world that does not submit to haste and convenience. And if today you are looking for an alternative to familiar sources of nutrition, if you want something that combines usefulness with wisdom, durability with safety, you should look at lupine. It offers more than it seems at first glance, and therein lies its power: ancient, quiet, almost magical, yet available to those willing to pay attention. In a world where we are constantly rushing, lupine remains a reminder. Sometimes the most important thing is not to hurry, but to listen, wait, and understand. And then even a modest seed can give strength enough for the body, for the mind, and for future generations.